Wonderful. I'm ready to go, and
Okay.
here we go. Anything else, Doug?
Today we have the pleasure of hearing from Leslie O'Flahaven. Leslie is going to give us a talk on today's program, Write Persuasively, so people can understand your message. Leslie, will you introduce yourself?
It will be my pleasure. Welcome, everyone. My name's Leslie O'Flahaven. You're seeing me on your monitor, and I'll introduce myself very briefly on this slide. My company is called ewrite. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, beautiful fall day out my window. I'm the owner of my company, and our business is to help people learn to write well at work. And I've owned this company for 25 years, and it's my life's work, and I'm extremely glad to be with you at ASQ today. Like all consultancy type people, I've prepared a slide that shows you some of the clients I've worked with, and you can see by this slide alone that I'm something of a professional vagabond. I'm lucky enough to come and go and work with lots of big organizations in our country and around the world to help employees write better. Email, chat, social media, text, web content, e-newsletters, whatever life brings you. On the right-hand side of the screen, I also wanted to let you know that I am an instructor for LinkedIn Learning, and I have 6 writing courses on LinkedIn Learning. But there's a benefit to knowing about this now, because during the COVID times and during this time when so many people are hunting for jobs, LinkedIn Learning has made hundreds and hundreds of courses free. They'll be free through the end of next March. So this is a great benefit. 2 of my courses are amongst the hundreds and hundreds of courses that are free. So if you go to opportunity.linkedin.com, you and any of your colleagues, friends, or family members can take lots of LinkedIn Learning courses for free. So welcome, everyone. Get ready to do some writing. During our brief webinar, I will pause a few different times, and I'm going to ask you to share some of your thoughts, to write just a very little bit. When that happens, just use the chat window and share your thoughts that way. I'll be monitoring that, and so will Douglas. You also have a handout to accompany the webinar, but if you haven't downloaded it, not to worry. I will show you all the same content on the screen. It's just sometimes easier to read writing samples in a PDF or a Word document. So you have 2 sources here. You have the webinar and the handout if you want to use it. Okay? Are you ready? I'm getting all these greetings from our lovely participants. Inmar asked, can you please drop the link for the handout in the chat room? And there we go. Douglas has done that, so I hope you've gotten it. All right, today's webinar, hands-on, ready to go. We're going to learn how to organize information so your readers understand immediately what you want them to think or do. When you're writing persuasively, you sometimes feel that it would be more logical if you give reason, persuasive point at the end. I'm going to campaign for the reverse order. Say your persuasive point right away. Our second learning objective today is to give you practice identifying your reader's most challenging question. When we're writing persuasively, we sometimes fear our reader's most challenging question, and I want to urge you, identify it and embrace it and answer the toughest question they have. And finally, we're going to talk about the different types of supporting information, the range that we have to choose from, and how to figure out which type of supporting information will convince your reader most. We rely on one type of supporting information, possibly too heavily, and I want to suggest some alternatives. Douglas mentioned that there'll be time for questions at the end, and there certainly will be, but I will pause during the webinar and invite you to ask questions. So if something pops into your head, don't hold it. Go ahead and put it in the window, and we'll answer it as we go along. Okay, here we go. How persuasive a writer are you? I've got the tiger on the left and the kitten on the right. So what I'd love to do is have you chat in and answer. You could say, I'm a tiger or I'm a kitten, but I want to know why. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have recently written an email, and the email was reminding people that they needed to complete an application, and you sent the email to 15 people, and only one did what you asked. Then I think you need to call yourself a kitten in that case. You weren't very persuasive, so you would chat in, I'm a kitten because recently I got a low response to an email I sent. So go ahead, in the chat window. Bill says, tiger, no time to waste, not messing around. Wesley says, I'm a kitten with tiger's teeth. That's a very interesting answer. I think you need a kitten orthodontist. Inmar, tiger, wow. Laura says, I'm a kitten. It takes me a couple emails to get a response. Denise, how clever, baby tiger. I've had Christine say both, sometimes one, sometimes the other. Ron says, Ron, it just passed me by. Kitten, hard to get people to respond to my emails. Depends on my audience. There we go. Gwen says, when it hopped past me, I think you said kitten. Sonia, I'm a kitten. Tina says either. Okay. Amal says, I'm a kitten because I try not to come across as rude. And Michael's answer is quite true. It depends on the topic. Carlos, I'm a kitten, I write, and then I wait for the best. Okay, I want to encourage all of you to have the persuasive writing skills of a tiger, but if there's such a thing as a polite tiger, okay. I don't mean a predator. Persuasion isn't predatory. Persuasion isn't going to chew your neck out, right? But a persuasive writer writes in a way that leaves no question about intent, quest, or proposal. Okay, and Lisa says, I'm Tony the Tiger. All right. So in our campaign to be, if there's such a thing as a nice tiger, let's start with part one, how to organize information. When you're persuading your readers, I hope you'll use the same principles as the people who built this strange and beautiful vacation cabin. So you may be wondering, what is she talking about? What does this cabin have to do with persuasive writing? Please let me explain. The people who built this cabin turned the building's face with this strange round window toward the most beautiful view. They used the best part of the real estate for the most beautiful part of their enjoyment of the cabin. They did not put the trash bin or the garage pointing toward the beach. And in your persuasive writing, whether it's an email, an actual proposal, or a blog post, we have good real estate and bad real estate. The beginning of your content, web content, proposal, email, the beginning is the best real estate. And just as this cabin points the face of the cabin towards the beautiful beach, I want you always to reserve the beginning of your writing for your persuasive point. If you hold it back, the risks are too high. And you want to, I got distracted because Tim said he's a culturally sensitive tiger, and I think that's what I'm advocating for as well. You may need some cultural sensitivity, but starting at the beginning with the essence of your persuasive point is the most practical way to write your document. This writing practice has a nickname. I didn't make this up, but I do use this nickname in my teaching a lot. And the nickname is BLUF, B-L-U-F, and it stands for the principle, put the bottom line up front. When you're writing persuasively, it's a best practice to put the bottom line up front. Well, what does that mean? This idiom comes from the world of accounting, and that's why I've given you the little ledger here on the left-hand side of the screen. When we ask the chief financial officer about our company's bottom line, we're asking them to encapsulate the picture of our company's financial health, okay? In this writing practice, I'm suggesting to you that to be most persuasive, you tell your readers 9 first. There's the bottom line, What it all adds up to is 9. Say what it all adds up to before you say 1 plus 1 plus 3 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1. If you give the details and assume that the reader will read on and will still be engaged by the time you make your persuasive point, you're risking too much. So the writing practice I'm suggesting for you is say 9 first. Say 9 first and then give the detail that supports it. Okay? Let me show you an example. On this slide, I've got a screenshot of the sample I'm showing you. I've got some of it enlarged, and this sample is also on your handout. On the following slide, I'll show it to you in whole cloth. Okay? So let me introduce this first by telling you that all the samples I'll show you during our webinar today are all real. I only use real samples in my teaching, and that's what I'm using today. All the names are changed and all the company names are changed because I'm not trying to get sued. So this is an email from David Sorensen. He's writing to his boss. Her name is Jill Wright, and the subject line of this email is recommendation to sponsor the Heart Association's 10K race. So this is an email, yes, but it's a type of proposal sent in the form of an email. Now, you could look at this on your handout, or you could look at it right here on this screen. Either way, you have the same information in the PDF and here on the screen. What I want you to notice is that David has done a really good job of getting his main point up front. I will make a couple points, and then I'm going to be quiet for a little while so you can read. First thing I hope you'll notice is that the subject line is extremely clear. From the subject line, we know that David is recommending that the company sponsor the Heart Association's 10K race. There's no wondering. He could have written a subject line such as new sponsorship opportunity. That would have been a less persuasive subject line. Now I want you to notice something else. It is really a lead, yes. In the first paragraph, David has written a BLUF paragraph. The whole first paragraph is the essence or a summary of everything that follows. Let's take a look. He gives a context sentence. Brian Sullivan has asked us to sponsor their 10K race. In his second sentence, he makes his clear, persuasive recommendation. I recommend that we sponsor this race because it will give us a significant opportunity to introduce our product, fat-free potato chips, to an important market. So if Jill decides to read nothing more than the BLUF paragraph, she has the persuasive message right there. If she decides to read the paragraphs out of order, she still has the persuasive message in her head. David thinks we should do this. If she decides to read the paragraphs later, she still knows what he wants, what he's recommending that they do. She's not wondering. Now, here's me being quiet for a few moments so you can go ahead and read this in detail. So I'll be quiet now. I'm going to watch my clock, and I'll check in with you in less than a minute. Go ahead and read. Okay. I know you're probably skimming and scanning here, and I hope that you've noticed that the BLUF paragraph stands alone and it is supported by the other paragraphs to come. Alana commented, I like the bold headings with the details. I like them very much too. I think they support his persuasive message because they make it possible to see easily. A couple people have made a connection between this type of persuasive writing and journalistic persuasive writing, or the journalistic practice of putting the essence, the gist, right at the beginning. Okay? So a BLUF paragraph Well, you may write it last. You may leave a blank space when you're writing your persuasive email. It doesn't matter when you write it. It does matter a lot that it's at the beginning of the email when you send it. Okay? Does anyone want to say, I already do this, or I don't already do this? Do you begin your persuasive writing with a short, firm summary statement, AKA a BLUF? Is this a practice you already use? Tell us in the chat whether you already do this. Alana says, I could do it better. Okay, that's a pretty humble answer. Email says it's new to me, sometimes. Tammy says 50-50. Okay, when I'm thinking. Usually not, but sometimes. Okay, well, this is an interesting set of answers. The trend is going, I intend to, I sometimes do, but I could get better. Okay, I don't currently do this. I put it at the end. And so for anyone who has been putting the main point at the end, I'm going to ask you to change that up for 2 weeks and see what happens. Because so many of us are reading our emails, especially on a mobile device. If you put the persuasive point at the end, it's physically really hard to get down to the end of an email on a mobile. People are going to miss it. Hey, Jason says it could be in a slide deck in a meeting if this is a business case. Absolutely. Some people who are writing a persuasive document are afraid they're going to lose their readers if they say their persuasive point too early. And I think that's probably not the case. Most people who are reading would be very, very grateful if you'd give them the gist of the persuasive point. And you'll notice David said, I think we should do this. That's his point. Elsewhere, he says we're going to have to move money over. There are some downsides. So he does elaborate on his persuasive point, but he gives his essential persuasive point right at the beginning. Okay, wonderful. And Wesley says, my boss is only reading a couple of lines. If that's the case, this is a great idea. That's right. Many people only read the first few sentences. Now, I've asked you this question already. Did you use a BLUF approach? In your best persuasive writing, do you use a BLUF approach? I think if you would be looking, as this woman is, and you're thinking back on your past, and you're thinking about some of your persuasive writing samples that worked out really well, where your reader or readers were convinced, I would bet that there was a strong message at or near the beginning. That's what I would wager. Okay, John says, do you use the BLUF topic here or just write it out? Do you find the BLUF being a very DoD or military term, or is it used elsewhere in industries? Well, you're absolutely right, John. The first place I learned about put the bottom line up front and this BLUF acronym was when I was teaching writing courses at the Defense Intelligence Agency. This concept is getting, I see it used well outside of that workplace, well outside. And it's just, this acronym BLUF and the concept behind it is familiar to so many readers. Please tell me your main point at the beginning, that I think it lives outside of the DoD, indeed. Okay, let's move on. Part 2 is identifying your reader's most challenging question. So, you know, think back to when you were a teenager and you came in after curfew. Your parents might have asked you some challenging questions, such as, why didn't you call me? That's one challenging question. But the really hard question that they are about to ask, where were you, is the one that you were dreading answering. And I'm saying that in persuasive writing at work, it's practical to identify that challenging question so that you have it out there where you can see it and you're preparing yourself to answer it. You may not be able to or willing to answer it explicitly, but you need to know it so that you don't walk around it in your document. Okay, so let's do a little practice. Here's an example, and I've left the most challenging question out. Okay, here's the example. You work for a company and you have organized an ergonomics training. You want people to get a good current training on setting up their workspace so that they don't injure their hands or their back or their neck. And you want everyone to attend. You have to persuade them to attend. It's not mandatory, it's an option, but you want them to attend. I've left the most challenging question out, but I've given you the second one. Is the instructor knowledgeable? And the third question is, will my employer help me act on what I learned? So if the ergonomics instructor says you need an expensive desk chair, is my company going to pay for that expensive desk chair? What do you think the most challenging question is? Got a couple answers. Christine says, how long will it take? Peter says, what's in it for me? Amal says, why is this right for me? How will it benefit me? Benjamin said, is it worth my time? Why do I need it? Will this help me get better? Why is this important to me? And Ron said, do I have to go? I love it. I love the sarcasm dripping off of your questions. Ditto to what's in it for me? Okay, is this training occurring during company time? Is it mandatory? There we go. I agree with all of you who commented about, do I really need to take time out of my schedule? With all of you who commented about the time expense, that's where I was going. Why should I give up my valuable time to learn about ergonomics? Okay, so is the instructor knowledgeable? That's a goodish question, and will my employer help me act on what I learned? Or also a reasonable question, but why should I give up the time for this? I have a lot of work to do. I think that's the most challenging question. And the only way your document will be persuasive is if you have articulated that challenging question to yourself. And I think not articulated, I think actually, in my opinion, as a writing instructor, you should write it down. Okay, let's do another one. You are writing a brief proposal to your boss in which you suggest offering paid summer internships for undergrads. In the past, your company's only offered unpaid summer internships. So your point is, the persuasive point is, we should be paying these interns. That's what you want to persuade your boss on. We should be paying people instead of getting interns who are willing to work for free. I said question number 2 challenging is how much do you want to pay them? Question number 3 challenging, will a paid internship attract a different type of applicant? So what is the number 1 most challenging question? Okay, why? Why should we pay them? Do we have the money? Is this in the budget? Why is paid better? What's the pay rate? How much? Tony says ROI. What are we going to get for paying them? Why do you feel this is needed? Lisa says, will we get tiger or kitten interns? Of course, that's the question of the ages. Do we want tiger interns? Yeah, I guess if we're paying them. How much will we need to pay? Is this costly change necessary? Offering a paid internship will, okay, so some of you are actually even answering this. Is there a legal reason to pay them? Why should we pay your children? That's a rascal answer. So I like it very much. So if we don't get down to the why of it all, why should we pay them, then we are going to miss the opportunity to truly persuade. The why should we do this is the truly persuasive reason. And I wrote, why should we pay interns when we've been recruiting great people for free? Now, I've read the brief proposal that I've sketched in for you here. And in fact, the person writing the proposal said, hey, we haven't been getting great people for free. We've been getting okay-ish people who require a lot of supervision for free. We believe we'll get a better quality of applicant. But the most challenging question is the one right here. Okay? One more example, one more practice. After the following practice, I'm going to take a deep breath and ask if you have any questions. This is a hard one, okay? You are an employer and you employ a team of 100 on-the-road sales consultants. So these are people who are traveling around the whole nation all the time. And you are writing an email suggesting that they complete a new and very tedious and detailed report on every location they worked at during the previous tax year. So you're saying to them, for the first time, I need you to complete this yucky, detailed, long report, and you need to say where you were working during the whole calendar year. So question number 2, how do I complete it? Question number 3, will completing this report affect my personal taxes at all? And here's what you're asking. What happens if I don't do it? What's in it for me? Why do I need to complete the report? Why is it good for the employer? Is it good for me? Why do I need to do it? Why do I need to do it? Can I justify your employment? Okay, that's the employer's question. Is this going to enhance my job? What's the goal? Okay, you know what? Will I get overtime? Well, that's a legit question. Why do I not need to do this, or why did I not need to do this? How will this benefit me? There's Ricardo. Ricardo, would I break the law if I don't do it? In my opinion, there's the core question of people who are being asked to do something that's required but very, very tedious. Was it in the contract? Is my job at risk? Okay, here's what I wrote. Do I really have to do this, or can I get out of it? And the point is, no, you cannot get out of it. So I am actually putting this difficult question in my reader's head, my reader's mouth, because I want to be able to say, no, you cannot get out of this. This is now required. Okay? Will I be fired if I don't do it? Claudio asked. And Mary said, what's the reason for it? Okay, now I would like to show you the document, the persuasive document for this example. Okay? So again, here's the beginning of it. Here's a screenshot of it, and I'll show you the whole thing on the following slide, or you can read it in your handout. This is to all the consultants who work for this company, which I called Line Production. It's from Diane Sandusky, and she's the director of tax and payroll, okay? And her subject line is request. Send a record of your 2018 work locations by December, sorry, wrong way, by December 29th, 2018. Now, let's see if she did a persuasive job. She does have a BLUF paragraph. She wrote, earlier this year, you provided estimates of your work locations. Thank you for your help. We now need you to submit your actual work locations by completing the attached spreadsheet by this deadline. If you are receiving this email, your response is mandatory. So once again, I'm going to be quiet and give you a little bit of time to read. And when you're done, I want you to comment on whether you can tell, did Diane imagine her reader's most challenging question? I'll be quiet now for just under a minute. Okay, it looks like a few of you are finished already, and it looks like Diane's email has raised some questions. Lisa asked, what will be done with this spreadsheet that I have to complete? Ricardo said, your response is mandatory. Let me paraphrase my question, though. I want to ask it slightly different, though I do appreciate your feedback. Did Diane imagine her readers or consider her readers' most challenging questions when she wrote this persuasive document? So please answer in the chat, did Diane think of her readers' most challenging questions? Gwen says, I don't think so. She put her needs, interesting point, she put her needs above the readers. So the answers are trending, no, yes, no, yes. Okay, Lisa says no, she's just providing instructions. Jason said she tried. Hey, Tina says the mandatory part clinched it. She addressed the tax implication. Peter says no, your response in mandatory doesn't work for us because everything is mandatory. Okay, It's a mandatory request. Ron says she could have had a stronger BLUF. All right, Amal says she did not address what to do if they don't have the information about their work locations. Well, Amal, I believe she's thinking they should, because she told them in January, you need to collect this. Matt says, poor planning on her part does not constitute an emergency on my part. Okay? She does use a very, Kahayim is saying she does use a very assertive approach. I would agree her writing is assertive. Okay? It's interesting. You're reading, there's more diversity in your opinion about this sample, about whether it's persuasive. I find this sample persuasive myself. I have to agree with you that she's not addressing the why we need this, just that we urgently and absolutely do need this. Wesley said it would have been better to have monthly submittals. Okay, but don't go down, don't get random on me now, because how she's handling it is, how she's handling the collection of this information isn't really the issue. I'm asking about, is this sample more persuasive? Shouldn't she be assertive if it's a new directive? I agree that she has every right to be assertive. Indeed, indeed. I take your points really well. There's a wider range of opinion about this sample than about the previous sample. In my opinion, this is persuasive, but I feel that you're reading this and wanting her to go to answer more of the why they need this information. Steve says, would using bold in the body of it turn people off? That's an interesting point. She has used rather more bold than we saw in the previous sample. I would like to make a kind of a side comment about using bold. The best way to use bold for emphasis is to use bold on the same elements so the bold comes up physically in the same place over and over. So her headings, her bolded headings, are actually doing a better job than the individual words like estimate or actual. The bolding there doesn't help very much. The headings help because they're in a predictable place. Okay, thanks for your input. This is me taking a deep breath. Does anyone have a question you haven't had a chance to ask yet? We're at the 35 minutes after the hour. Does anyone have a question, something you'd like to bring up about persuasive writing? Thomas says, was she a tiger? In my opinion, she is. In some other people's opinion, she's all teeth. All teeth and no reason, I guess. Anyone else, do you have a question or a comment you'd like to make about the two writing practices I've showed, persuasive writing practices I've showed you so far? The first is begin with the bottom line up front. The second is anticipate your reader's most challenging question and make sure you've answered it in your persuasive document. Laura asks, do you use persuasive writing in replies to emails, back and forth communication? Yes, I absolutely do. Absolutely. Gwen asked a related question. Does BLUF ever land as aggressive with certain audiences? It can land as aggressive, but the BLUF samples I've shown you have done very little courtesy writing. In email especially, you can have both. It would be possible to say, I hope everyone is enjoying the beautiful fall weather today, and then move on to your BLUF. You can do both. You can. Aris asks, any success studies of using BLUF as opposed to not using it? You know, Aris, I'm sure I could scour the research for that and find success studies in that regard. I know there are success studies when it comes to a message-oriented subject line. If you'd like to follow up with me separately, I could cite some of that research. Peter wrote, I think it's important to understand your reader and your audience, as different readers have different whys. That's a really good point, Peter, and that's why I'm glad I showed at least 3 anticipated questions. And maybe you're right. Maybe the writer assumes that one of them is the most important question. Maybe the other is we address all of them. Tina says, I think it's important to make a distinction between persuasive versus when a person needs to make, even with a pretty please. Indeed, indeed. Brandon wrote, do you find it requires more time to write responses using persuasion? For me, it generally does. Yes, I do. I would agree, and I think it's time spent, well spent. It yields better results. How would you structure a BLUF if it is a it depends situation? What an interesting question, Amal says. I would write that in the BLUF. I would say, for example, if the job market remains consistent, I believe we should pay our summer interns for 2021. If the job market crashes and we have highly qualified summer intern applicants who are eager to work for free, perhaps we could wait until 2022 to start paying our interns. You can write a BLUF that handles an if-then or two different options. Okay, does environmental scanning, Kahaim is asking, is environmental scanning necessary for an approach in a hostile or competitive environment? If a BLUF is used, then would it not be giving your position prematurely? That's a very interesting question, but your question is built on the assumption that the reader will stick with you through until the end. And in most cases, I think that's a risky assumption. I understand your question, but I think it's a risky assumption to assume that the reader will read to the very end of the document. And finally, is this information available to Diane already? The weekly reports over the year, asks Wayne, but it's easier for her if she has everyone else too. Okay, we're still mad at Diane. I think I'm going to move along now. Poor Diane. She's getting ganged up out here. Let's move on. All right. We have been thinking about a current persuasive writing project and your reader's most challenging question. Given the time, I think I'll move on from here and move on to the hour section on incorporating supporting information. It's very likely that a persuasive writing lesson is one you had in your high school writing class and in your college writing class. And when we were studying composition in college or even in high school, oftentimes our writing teacher did teach us about different types of supporting information. I've listed 9 of them here. You can use facts to support your point. You can use an example, which you would cue with one time when, or for example, you could use a definition, a statistic, an anecdote, a quotation. You could cite a policy. There's lots of different types of supporting information. And my overall point here is choose a wide range of types of supporting information. I think people who are in the quality community and people outside of the quality community often rely on one type too often. They don't avail themselves of all 9 of these types of supporting information. They rely on data too often. If you love data, then you easily believe that your reader will be very well convinced by data. And it's true, some readers are very well convinced by data, but many readers aren't well convinced by data. And so to exercise your skills, to build them, to stretch, it's a great idea to remember to use some of these in combination with data or instead of data. An example of an individual is not a statistically defensible, but it may be more convincing than another example, a data-driven example. One of the most interesting persuasive writing samples I've looked at recently was a humane society, like the ASPCA, but not the ASPCA. It was their web content about why you should have your pet spayed or neutered. And they could easily give data about how many animals come to shelters because cats and dogs weren't spayed or neutered. This is somewhat compelling, but the scope of the problem isn't something that an individual pet owner will respond to. An example or an anecdote about an individual animal who lives as a beloved pet in someone's home may be more compelling than nationwide data in that case. Okay? So let's talk about the different types of supporting information for the examples we've seen. So if you're writing this all-staff email about ergonomics training, and we have agreed that one of the most challenging questions, your reader's toughest questions, why should I give up my time? Then what would you look at here? Which type of supporting information would be really good to convince somebody to give up their time for ergonomics training? Why don't you chat in? Which type of supporting information would be really good to convince somebody to give up their time for ergonomics training? Nikki says a statistic. So 78% of work-at-home employees have back strain. Facts, says Carlos. Examples, says Christine. Mary's got two, a statistic or an anecdote. I would like to read something personal. Okay, Jennifer says an emotional appeal might work, and I'm appealing to you. I think that an emotional appeal combined with data, Charles says, I think this is probably right. I don't think the numbers here, the numbers type supporting information are going to convince me to sign up for a 90-minute webinar about ergonomics. I don't think that's what it is. I think telling an anecdote or giving a quotation, maybe the CEO says, I had migraine headaches until the ergonomics expert we have invited decided to explain to me how to adjust my monitor. I think something personal will work more to answer the question, how do I give up my time? And Ron says, examples that have already been successful for addressing these issues. Good. Let's consider another one. How about this one? If you're going to convince your management to pay those interns, not to have free interns in the summer of 2021, but to pay them, which type of supporting information would be best? What would you use? We need to pay those interns. Okay, Genesis says, here we're going for statistics. Facts, data. Okay, folks are coming in with hard numbers here. So this is a really interesting response on your part. If you're going to use statistics, facts, or data, I would say the authority of the source is what's going to be most convincing. So if we go with the Society for Human Resource Management says such and such, that would be really great. But Juan says we need the examples of the underperforming past unpaid interns. Indeed, so we could combine facts and statistics with an example, an anecdote about the intern, you know, whatever, the intern Leslie from summer 2019 who was such a poorly performing intern. Okay, good answer, great. Now, do I really have to do this report? We're going to, poor Diane, Actually, okay, so Sonia says you could compare to other companies for the interns. Yes, that would be an interesting example. And I didn't list comparison. So back to poor Diane Sandusky. What type of supporting information should she have used? What should she have used? Because we have seen her entire email. She should have quoted the policy. Yep. Okay, so she should have quoted the policy, and if it came straight from the IRS, it probably would be a bit more persuasive. Her writing would have been more persuasive. Okay, she could also have cited the examples that of the preparation she had given people so that they wouldn't have to recall every location they had been in at the end of the year. Okay, policy and facts. So the takeaway from the third part of our webinar is that, you know, it's like making dinner. You have other things you can prepare than pasta. So you have other types of supporting information you can use when you're trying to convince someone. And I would say for people in the quality community, the non-numbers related types of information may get overlooked. And I hope that you'll, you know, restore your focus or reinvigorate your focus. Tammy says, do add supporting information as attachments, that's right, or weave it into the statements. The data is important, but it may distract from the point and quick read. How do we recommend that you provide it? That's an interesting question, Tammy. So you're asking, if you have used data in the maybe it's a few slides from a PowerPoint deck. How do you use it? What I suggest is that you mention what you have attached and mention what you want people to notice in what you have attached, and then use the attachment. So you could say, I've attached a spreadsheet showing 2 options for distributing the revenue. As you'll see, the quarterly distribution is more time-consuming for us than the annual distribution, something like that. If you add supporting information as an attachment, make sure you also tell people what they should be, what point you want them to get from it. Don't just say, please see attached, and let them draw the point. That's not good persuasion. You give a BLUF about what you want them to think about the attachment too. Okay, now I'd like to show you one more sample before it's time for us to wrap up. Okay, if you are, this is the next example I'm going to show you. Let's say you're the facilities manager for a corporate office building, so you're the, the head maintenance person, and you must persuade employees to give up their space heaters and fans, because using the space heaters and the fans, it violates the terms of the lease, and it's messing up the temperature in the office. What are your readers' questions? So you are tasked with telling people, if you have a space heater in your cubicle, or if you have a fan, I need you to get rid of it by the certain date, because our lease doesn't allow those, and it's messing up our temperature. So how can I be warm enough? How will I stay warm or cool? Lisa says, is the building going to address the temperature issues? Laura, what are the alternatives to keeping us comfortable? How do I stay comfortable? There we go. So you're thinking of your readers' questions. Would you provide alternatives? How can I be productive while I'm so uncomfortable? Good, Nikki. That's a pretty salty question, and that's a very real world one. Here's what I wrote. How will you control the temperature? What will happen if I don't obey this request? And finally, who can I appeal to about this? So you have listed many great questions. How will you solve the problems, says Thomas, that are currently being solved by the fans and the space heaters? Now, I want to show you the writer's document, and I want to ask you whether you think it's persuasive. I'm going to show you what this facilities manager wrote. You ready? His name is Mike Mansfield. He is writing an all-staff email to everyone who works for this company I called Prime Products, and he's written the subject line, temperature control. Here's his entire email. So let me ask you, did this writer do a good job? Did Mike do a good job incorporating supporting information? And once again, I'm going to be quiet for a little bit so you can read. Okay? I'll be quiet now for just under a minute so you can read. Okay. She says he did, in some sort of a storytelling way, units unite. The to-do is too far down, indeed. Steve says the zingers in paragraph 2, and many people will only read paragraph 1. Ramamurthy said, this email lost me. Good job. This has no bluff. The point wanders, and though he does have good supporting information, it is buried. Denise says it is not persuasive. I agree with you. I feel terrible for Mike because nobody's going to read this. Nobody is going to read this at all. Tracy says he had too much story and it's too hard to find the point. Now, he did cite the policy. He did explain, he gave reasons that the space heaters and fans are messing with the thermostat. He did answer some of the questions that you asked earlier. What will you do to keep me comfortable? How will I concentrate if I'm not comfortable? Laura says he is definitely a kitten. Oh, he is a kitten, isn't he? He has good points, but it's not persuasive. Let me show you a revision of this email and tell me if you think he could have done a better job. Here's a revision. The subject line is policy reminder, remove space heaters or fans by September 1. Right, Charles says, this is not a pleasant subject. I would not start by saying, I hope everyone had a good summer. It's a good point, Charles, but in the revision, I hope that you think he remained pleasant, a pleasant person. Thank you for letting me know about the uncomfortable temperatures. We are working with the landlord to resolve these problems. Let me be quiet for just a moment and you take a look at this version, and I'll keep Jennifer's question in mind. Does personal communication style alter how the message is received when using BLUF, i.e. information rich versus low context? Okay, just a moment, Jennifer, and let's have people take a look. There we go. This version is better. We get the point right away. Okay, now I want to make sure I talk a little bit about Jennifer's question. We like this one better, doesn't it? It makes us feel smarter and more calm. Jennifer, I'm scrolling past your question. I fear, there we go. Does personal communication style affect the BLUF? Yes, it does. It does. You don't have to write this email exactly in the revised version that we're seeing from Mike, but you do have to physically put the main point at the beginning, and you do need to cue the reader, I'm giving you persuasive reasons. We're noticing there are more bullets in this version, but there were bullets in the original version. That's the sad thing. There are bullets here, they just don't help very much. The combination of writing choices, a strong subject line, a BLUF paragraph, less blah, blah, blah about, chit-chat, and direct answers to the reader's skeptical questions help with this. Okay? I'm also, there's a threat to confiscate the heater. If the policy prohibits it, why say it explicitly? Yeah, I don't think it's a threat. It's an explanation they're going to confiscate it. I think it will encourage people to get the heater out of the office more quickly. He did not answer how this would keep me cool, but it's very clear on the policy. He did answer in the sense that he wants to urge people to agree with him that if we don't have the space heaters and fans messing with the thermostat, the building will be more comfortable. I can understand why people would be skeptical. So, takeaways here, put your bottom line up front, identify your reader's most challenging questions, and learn to incorporate a variety of supporting information that convinces your readers. We have a little bit more time for questions. I'm sharing my contact information here, and I also wanted to explain something that I didn't mention at the beginning. I hope you noticed that this PowerPoint template was for the annual conference, the ASQ World Conference that should have been this May. I was scheduled to deliver this presentation in May at the annual conference. It was going to be my first time speaking at your community's annual conference, and I was really looking forward to it. Sadly, it was canceled, but I wanted to still have the opportunity to share this content if it presented itself, and it did today. So thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or any other comments? Aris says, do you have any de-escalation tactics for too much tiger? Yes. I would say make sure that you have ample reasons in your persuasive writing. Too much tiger is often the type of writing people do when they believe the reasons are just so obvious. Anyone else? Any other questions you'd like to ask? Peter says, do you advocate readability measures? No, I do not. Unless you know something very specific about your reader's reading level. For example, if you're writing for people who you know, there's research on this particular group of readers, and you know that they're reading perhaps a 6th or 7th grade, and yes, you would use those readers. But most of us don't know exactly what our readers' readability strengths are, and those readability measures tell you some very concrete and very superficial features of the writing. Just as an example, the novel The Catcher in the Rye, which is written with very short sentences and few multisyllable words, comes out to be something around the 3rd grade reading level, and we all know that it's a sophisticated novel that requires insight to understand. So those readability measures are useful when and only when you have concrete research about your reader's reading level. Okay? Does this work in a global requirement? That's an interesting question, Carlos, because putting the bottom line up front is rather a North American way of writing, and culture does affect how you present your persuasive points. However, the bodies of the persuasive documents I've shown you, I think, are acceptable across culture. In some other cultures, it can be, other than North American, can be considered confrontational to begin with the bottom line up front. Haima asks, how do you balance empathy with persuasive tactics? I think using more examples and anecdotes helps you come across as empathetic, because you can imagine, you're presenting actual people, and it will show that you are imagining the individual even when you're writing about the group. Anyone else? Charles says, do you have any thought on keeping readers reading beyond the first paragraph when your intent is maybe not to persuade, but to educate? I say to continue to use headings to make the content scannable, because if you want them to read beyond the first paragraph, you may still need to acknowledge that they will read the paragraphs in the order they prefer, and write in a very personal style. Lots of I, we, you, and lots of people who can be imagined and pictured in the writing. Wonderful. I'm not idly sharing my email address. I really hope that you will be able to connect with me, that you'll look me up on LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter at Leslie O. If you like Twitter, I love Twitter. This is me. And if you would like to be in touch with me, it would be my pleasure. Anyone else? Bola says, can we talk about persuasion in project or contract monthly reports? How do you recommend the BLUF and anticipating challenges? If your project or contract monthly report does not have a repeated structure that includes a BLUF, then redo your template so that it has bottom line. So you would say, bottom line monthly topics I'm going to report on right at the beginning, and it could be accomplishments, concerns, next steps, something as simple as that. Most monthly report formats do have a neighborhood for the BLUF. Wayne asked, how does one write more persuasively when you do not have an open and shut case as there is in your examples? For example, the problem is well defined, but there are several possible solutions, not all of which are known now. That's a very real-world question. I think you make sure that you communicate which of the persuasive options, which of the options you're leaning towards while you're considering the others. So let's go back to the intern example. Maybe the problem is that we have been attracting interns who require a lot of supervision and aren't very serious about the internship. So we're persuading our boss that we need to do things differently with the internship. In this case, we might say, we're having problems recruiting the type of undergraduate interns who are an asset to our business. We should consider paying them, recruiting them in a different way, such as on-campus visits, or recruiting graduate students instead of undergraduates. So you've given 3 options. I think you owe your reader the following. I believe that paying the undergraduates is the best way to go. So you can say, we should consider these three options, but I'm leaning toward this one option. Alan, I'm not sure I understand your question. How does one write persuasively to initiate a process change? Let me take a stab at it. If you're saying the way we collect our data is inefficient, we should change the process of collecting data to this other process, I think you're going to have to explain why what we're doing for our current process is working poorly. But you do that after you suggest what we should do going forward. That's what I would do. Anyone else? How to persuade your boss or supervisor or higher level manager to use That's a great question. So I'm thinking your boss is not as persuasive, you know, as you think this person should be. As a lifelong writing teacher, I think the power of a great model can persuade people to improve their writing skills, even if talking about how to write it better isn't working. So what you could do would be to show the two versions of that space heater email and ask your boss which one is better. And most people will say the second one is better, and then perhaps you could talk about why. Persuade your boss to be more persuasive. Very clever. Any other questions? Okay, then. Well, Doug, anything else you want to say?
No, you've done such a marvelous job handling the questions. I didn't have to do anything. So I want to, basically just cover off a few closing items here. We will